Welcome to Co-Opinions. My name is Josh, and today I have Nick with me.
Hey, Josh.
So it's been a little while since you've been on, Nick. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you've been playing?
Lately, I've been playing Wasteland 2. So that's a game by the In Exile Entertainment guys. These are former guys from Interplay, the creators of the original Fallout games. And Wasteland 2, so a little bit of backstory. Wasteland, the original game from the late 1980s, was actually the inspiration for the original Fallout.
Interesting.
That got created and was basically a squad-based post-apocalyptic open-world RPG. And when they went to go ahead and try and make a sequel, what they found is that they were having issues with getting the rights. And that's kind of where Fallout came from. And they also narrowed the scope and had it more focused on a protagonist who may or may not have followers instead of just full-on rolling a fresh squad. That's been a really good game. It really kind of captures the flavor of those original Fallout games. I think one point I raised to you before was that, in my mind, Fallout 3 seemed to kind of focus more on your character as kind of this hero with this great destiny to fulfill, especially when you get to that major choice at the end involving the water purification plant. New Vegas, of course, with the Obsidian Entertainment guys, went ahead and focused that a little bit more to kind of just like a factions-based thing. Here you are, you're just this courier in this world, and you're inhabiting this world and making just making choices of which factions to ally yourself. I feel like Wasteland 2 is kind of even a closer sort of callback to that. You are the desert rangers, basically lawmen trying to go ahead and civilize parts of the West, but of course you have a choice to be as much of a dick as you want to be. And it's pretty common for you to roll into an area and kind of meet 2 or 3 different factions that inhabit that area, and then go from there. Like one that I think I had told you about, Josh, was the Mad Monks, the mutually assured destruction monks. So these were monks that had controlled a little canyon area, basically the only pass through to go between west and east that wasn't blocked by radiation. And what they did with that is that they strapped actual nuclear grenades to their chests. And if anyone broke Titan's peace, as they called it, they would just go ahead and jihadi themselves all over the place. And that was enough for the different raider factions to go ahead and ensure that when people got there, no one caused any trouble, because there was a greater threat. The reference to Titan's peace is that they had a literal Titan missile, a nuclear ballistic missile that they said, yeah, the world's going to end someday, and it's going to end because Titan's going to get really pissed off, and you really make Titan mad when you break Titan's peace. So as you get there, then you encounter this group of people called the Diamondback Militia, which are basically just a bunch of raiders with a prettier name, military tactics, and rank, and so on. And you have that choice to go ahead and, because these guys are legitimately crazy. They worship radiation. They call it the Great Glow. They think the Great Glow infuses us all. And to expose yourself to radioactive waste is to go ahead and become closer to God. So these guys are crazy. You don't really want them to have a nuclear warhead. At the same time, giving people that are just quasi-raiders a nuclear warhead doesn't sound any better. I disarmed the warhead, and unfortunately the end result of that was that it just turned into a bloodbath where now everyone's just murdering each other out there because there's no incentive not to anymore. I like to think I accomplished a greater good in that specific mission, but that questline kind of speaks to a lot of what Wasteland 2 is about. I've been having a lot of fun with it, but it is kind of buggy. The other thing I told you about with that segment was that I'm playing the director's cut version of this. It was very buggy when it came out, and this version's supposed to be fully patched. But I had to go ahead and edit a save file because one of the major quest items that I needed didn't get put in my inventory when I was talking with someone. And that was the fix I found online, is people saying, yeah, you're going to have to update your save file to put that in your own inventory. So that didn't bother me too much, but it did end up kind of breaking the game a little bit, because once you kind of have access to that, it's real tough whenever you encounter any sort of a nuisance or irritation not to just be like, well, I think I need 100 more skill points. For instance, to solve a quest, I found out that I needed to have a much higher safe cracking skill set so I could get into the safe. And I was thinking, okay, well, I could just go ahead and quest and come back, but I didn't want to do that. So instead, I was just open up the file, go ahead and start maxing out. And that's at first that was just supposed to be something I did to get past short-term obstacles. What it has instead led to is I have this hobo in my party card called Scotchmo. He's an alcoholic who's sad that his wife is gone, and he's got a shotgun. And I have made him the strongest, most intelligent, luckiest, most coordinated, and fastest hobo across the nation.
Good old Scotchmo.
Scotchmo is a genius among men. I have kept his charisma at 1, though, because I feel like he still doesn't shower. That's how I'm role-playing my Scotchmo. So you can roleplay as a hobo. I think that's a great pitch for a game.
I'm about to say that right there. Sold.
What have you been playing, Josh?
So the big thing that I've been playing recently has been Horizon Zero Dawn. I wrapped up the game I was previously playing and wanted to start up Dark Souls 3. I got to the first boss, and he just proceeded to wail on me for 45 minutes. I'll go back and try him again, but I just wasn't feeling getting railed for 45 minutes at the time.
There's European videos you can watch if you want that.
I'm about to say, you didn't even buy me dinner first. Anyways.
I think you had made mention that the parry skill is something that's very important to these games. What was your major issue, I guess, with this tutorial? Was it in finding the right timing for that parry move?
It was finding the right timing. So, as I've made no small issue about hiding, I love Bloodborne. Loved it to death. But a big thing in Bloodborne is you have to be real aggressive, and the parry move in that game comes from shooting an enemy right before they attack. So near the end of Bloodborne, I was fairly confident with this move. In Dark Souls 3, to parry, you have to swing your shield wide right before they attack. I have not gotten that down yet. Some guys that I talked to about this game say I need to focus more on rolling. So we'll see if rolling helps more. This is the kind of game where the boss took me down in 3 hits. And he's got 2 forms. So in his second form, he goes from guy with a big old spear to giant snake goo monster. I have yet to hit him as a giant snake goo monster.
I'd be curious for the lore explanation of why he has turned into a gigantic snake goo monster.
There is a lot when it comes to the plot of the Dark Souls games. And at some point, we're going to have a discussion about environmental storytelling. And the Dark Souls, Bloodborne, those are going to be enormous games when it comes to that because they tell you next to nothing. So that'll be. But after I got beat on for 45 minutes, I decided I would boot up Horizon Zero Dawn. I got that a few months back, haven't had a chance to start it up. And unfortunately, quote unquote, unfortunately, it takes about 3-ish hours to get past the tutorial, but it's not like Kingdom Hearts 2, where the tutorial, you don't really make any progress. You're still leveling up during this tutorial, you're still learning new things, they're establishing characters, motivations, but you don't really get to leave the starting area. And I honestly thought I was going to have to put the game down because I messed up in reading things, and the enemies are styled after the robot enemies because to anybody not familiar, Horizon Zero Dawn is a game that appears to be set in the future past where everybody runs around like cavemen, but there's robot animals everywhere. They haven't explained that yet, but I'm this close to them explaining it.
So one question I guess I have for you from a gameplay perspective, I feel like I thought a lot of posting on the internet kind of comparing Horizon Zero Dawn as a contender to Zelda Breath of the Wild. Is there any basis for any comparison like that, or is that just people being idiots online?
People being idiots online. Because with Zelda Breath of the Wild, there's it's much more minimal to me, which that's not a dig against Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn, it has a certain freneticness that you end up rolling into. So the thing that almost got me to put it down was there's an enemy type called a sawtooth. That's basically from the ground to the top of its shoulder an 8-foot tall saber-toothed tiger with saws for teeth. I didn't realize that the different bows have different kinds of ammo, because to me that doesn't make a lot of sense personally. I would think one bow could have all ammo. Not the case. So I played through about 10 hours of this game with only 2 different kinds of weapons, and I never modified my bow or my armor because I thought I had to get a perk to do that. No, you need a perk to respec them, not to spec them.
This kind of makes me think of when you played Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep and never leveled up your characters.
Yeah, luckily I didn't get to the end of Horizon Zero Dawn without doing that. But, so there was a point where I had to kill more than one sawtooth at a time, and I couldn't do it. They were just destroying me. And I look online, I go, what am I doing wrong? Why haven't you upgraded your equipment? Pardon? So after I did that, I've really got way more into the swing of things. Talking to somebody who's about beating this game, I think I have less than 20% left. I'm coming real close to what appears to be the ending of it. And I'm really getting into it. In fact, I'm hoping that we have some time that I can show you after this. There is an instance where you have to hijack 2 saber-toothed tigers with cannons on their back to take down a Robo T-Rex. That's pretty much a summary of why the game gets awesome. Because you don't get much sweeter than that.
No.
But I'm enjoying it a lot. I've sunk a lot of time into it over the last couple weeks. And after this, I'm going to try Dark Souls 3 again. But more than likely, I picked up Dishonored Death of the Outsider. And that's supposed to be like 6 hours long. So I'm probably going to give that a shot. Anyways, transitioning on to our topic for today. One thing I have been wanting to talk with Nick about ever since we started this podcast was the game series Lisa. Because a lot of people have heard about Undertale, which is the game where you don't have to hurt anybody, but you can interact with almost anybody, yada yada. Lisa's like the way darker version of that. Because through one way or another, you can kill just about anybody, and there's no real benefit to not killing just about anybody.
I think you phrased it to me in one instant message as, Lisa is the game where you're not going to try to hurt anyone, but you're going to end up doing that anyways.
Yeah, you're going to end up hurting just about everyone. Now, one thing I'm curious about, if you can remember, how did this game even get on your radar?
I saw posts about it online. I started seeing posts on 4chan just kind of talking about it, and the graphic style was what kind of drew me in. And then at that point, I heard people talk about it as an RPG kind of similar to Earthbound, in the sense that the creator himself says he was greatly inspired by Earthbound. And after that, then I picked it up on a sale.
I had a similar adventure myself where I saw people doing reviews and saying, this is a game where you can potentially lose your arm. Pardon? And a little backstory on this game is that this was a Kickstarter game. One of the few games in my experience that actually saw the light of day. It was made with RPG Maker, so the graphics are a little more basic than what you would normally hope, quote unquote, but that does not actually detract whatsoever from the game itself. In fact, it adds a lot to the atmosphere, because where a lot of games are derided for the browns and the blands, there is a lot of brown in this game, but there's also a lot of color. It helps contrast the fact that these are still I was going to say good people, but they're not. These are still people in a world that basically is dying. Because going on to the premise of the game, the world has no women. There was an event that happened they never really explained called the White Flash, and all the women are gone. You play as Brad, a drug-addicted, middle-aged man who at the beginning of the game has an awesome pompadour, and while he's out being Brad, he finds a baby girl on the ground. To set the pace for the game, as soon as he picks up the baby girl, he throws her up in the air and she likes it, and he throws her up in the air and then he drops her. And that pretty much sets the pace of the game moving forward.
Was he actually drug addicted at the beginning, or was he just an alcoholic?
At the beginning, he was drug addicted. In this game, there is a drug called joy, and he's taken a lot of joy. Now, once he finds this baby girl, who he names Buddy, he tries to kick the habit. And it fast forwards a decade or 15 years later to where she's old enough that she can function, and he has lost his awesome pompadour. He has a few friends with him, 3, I believe. They're the only ones who know that this girl, Buddy, even exists. The game kicks off when Buddy gets kidnapped and Brad goes to find her. And Brad is so protective of Buddy, and you don't really understand why at the beginning. It just seems unusual. They make a plot point of it at the beginning where Buddy wants to go outside without her mask on, and Brad stops her immediately. He's like, no, you can never go outside, and she starts to get resentful because she is still a person, and he's keeping her from doing things.
One thing I think we should call out before we go any further is that there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this discussion, so if any of our friends haven't played these and want to, this would be a good episode to skip until you've done so.
The one thing I would recommend, if this sounds like a game you'd be interested in before I say bounce now, is that if you're looking for a really dark Earthbound, this is pretty much that. Now, that also being said, there was a lot of criticism given to the difficulty of this game. I don't know if it's because we've been playing games for close to 3 decades, but I didn't find it that difficult, especially when you figure out how you can combo certain moves together, and we'll get on to that. Anyways, So bounce now if you have any interest in playing these games unspoiled. So after you set off in search of finding Buddy, you start to really get a picture of what kind of world you're living in. I remember, so there was what we would call a tutorial area. There was a balloon at the edge of a ledge, and when you try to go off the ledge, the balloon stops you and goes, listen, this is the only time I'm doing this, but if you go over here, you die. Game over. Neither of us believe that. We're like, it can't be that ridiculous. So what was the first thing that either of us did?
Whee!
Light blue background, white lettering. Game over. That was really the shock to me, where I knew this game wasn't going to be messing around. And as you progress through this tutorial area, you learn the fighting system, which it's a lot... The main character's fighting is a lot like Sabin from FF6, where you have to put together punches, kicks, and headbutts that can trigger special moves. And I thought this was interesting because at the time it didn't seem to make a lot of sense why you would have to put it together. It becomes a major plot point later, however. So you meet up, the first guy you're introduced to is Terry Hintz. You get so many characters in this game. So many. And Terry's worthless. There's no two ways about it. And did you have any higher opinion of Terry than I did?
No, I read online that if you level him up, then he has the ability to go ahead and do some really powerful stuff. But you basically have to level him up to near endgame levels, and at that point he's useful. But why would you do that? And
even there, I know what you're referring to. He has some moves near the very end that are supposed to be wicked overpowered. But by the time you've gotten there, you have a lot of other people who are wicked overpowered. So you have done a lot for essentially nothing to me. I don't know.
In my mind, he's a flavor character. He's just meant to go ahead and move some of those plot points along, like early on in the game where you have him get kidnapped. A bully from your character's past rides in on this deer. The guy looks kind of goofy. He's got sunglasses on. He's riding a cute little deer. And what he tells you is you have to give him all of your dirty magazines because in this post-apocalyptic world with no women, porno magazines are currency. Otherwise, you're never going to see Terry again. He's got Terry with a bag over his head in front of you. I think that was the sole purpose of Terry, was to appear in that kind of context. If you do not turn over your dirty magazines, then you fight Terry later near the end of the game when you fight this guy and his gang. And Terry is much, much stronger by that point, far stronger than he would ever be having him in your own party. And the dialogue is intended to make you feel bad, talking about, I really thought we could be friends. I thought you were a really cool guy.
And that right there is the lightest version of the kind of decisions they make you make in this game, because Columbo, your bully from the past, he implies he's killing Terry, doesn't he?
Yes.
I think he even says, I'm going to kill Terry. So at this point, you're like, well, I don't want to really give up my items. And Terry is useless. So I didn't give up Terry because I would have felt bad. I'm pretty sure you didn't give up Terry. Did you give up Terry?
No, I didn't give up Terry for the same reason. I mean, it would kind of feel like if someone told you just go ahead and break the neck of a kitten or something, it would be like, well, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, that's a very apt analogy. Plus, on top of it, from a more pragmatic perspective, you don't have a lot of magazines at that point anyways. It's the beginning of the game. Now, you continue on in search of Buddy, and you find a bunch of indicators of where she may have gone. Now, we're not going to touch on the exact structure here because I feel like finding Buddy is more of a coincidence than anything. Like, you sometimes get leads. Like, at one point, they tell you that they're keeping a woman hostage for pleasure purposes at a factory or something. This is where you encounter the hair club for men, yes?
Yep, men's hair club.
And when you get to, we'll touch more on them in a second, but when you get to the end of the factory, it's not a woman at all. It's some poor dude.
He was a former trucker. He's very obese, and he's got a little mustache. He will join your party after that, and the only move that he has at that time is the ability to weep.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about how the depravity of this game contrasts starkly with the semi-cheerful environment. It's really weird juxtaposition because I can't candy coat this. The dude was straight up just raped constantly. That was what happened to him. And they still try to make light of it.
The area seems really cheerful when you go in. Like, it's a men's hair club. You have all these different NPCs that you run into who have these bizarre hairdos. And you get to the end, and you find the 3 leaders of the men's hair club. And it's these 3 guys who are very upset that you've come in there with your bald head. The dialogue is, you come into our club with no hair, you dandy and then the fight starts. And in that fight, it's these 3 men all kind of arms together, and their hair is linked together into a gigantic middle finger. And the hair is a separate enemy that you can fight over the course of the fight in the battle. You're supposed to target the hair first before you actually target the guys.
Oh, it's so bizarre, but
that's really funny. And then you find out, oh yeah, these guys have been raping this man for the last however knows how long. And rumor got out that there was a woman there.
Yeah, oh man. And the other little details about it, like, so we alluded to this earlier, there's the drug Joy. And they don't really tell you that there's a downside to taking Joy other than the fact that Brad was addicted to it. And you find, while roaming the world, a bunch of mutants. These are hands down, to me, the hardest enemies in the game. Because these are the enemies that can kill your party members. Not knock out. Important distinction.
Literally insta-kill death move where that character member is gone from the game.
Mm-hmm. And as you're defeating these mutants, I remember somewhat near the beginning I saw one. And at that point I'm thinking, I'm killing all these other guys, no problem. I can take him down. This mutant one-shot everybody in my party. Oh my god. What in the world? So when I was able to defeat him, I noticed something. The mutants always drop Joy. This is highly suspicious. Now, at this point, I'd already been taking Joy because Joy ups your attack tremendously. Joy makes you a beast. So kudos to you because you got through the whole game without taking any Joy, which gives you a different ending if you weren't aware.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, so as you're going after Buddy, there's the hair club. There is, I'm trying to remember the specific examples because I know I'm having trouble linking the areas together in a logical fashion.
So the men's hair club is over in Area 1. I don't know if these Salvation Rangers are specifically like the endpoint of Area 2, but they do occur in Area 2. And this is basically a knockoff of the Power Rangers where you have these 7 guys with where you go ahead and I think they just kind of inconvenience you. So you're going through this construction area and they'll do things to make your progression more difficult. And it's just kind of goofy dialogue and same kind of thing we talked about where it's kind of funny. Then you get to the end of this area and you find out that the Joy has taken effect and these guys have mutated into Joy mutants. And now they've torn up some of the other Salvation Rangers where some of these guys have literally been torn in half. One of the Salvation Rangers is now just kind of collapsed and immobile as an oversized Joy mutant. It's very grim.
I remember that you encounter them before they transform only because you're like, oh, these are just goofy recurring characters. And then they do imply at least one of them takes Joy because when you do find them at the end, the blue one has transformed into Joy mutant and has killed almost every other one. I say almost because the green Salvation Ranger managed to get away. We'll hopefully touch back on him later if I can remember it. But they're a great example of where something that is introduced as innocuous becomes absolutely horrifying later. I know there's another example of something like that where you are told to go. I think this is the first time they introduced Buzzo, because Buzzo, for all intents and purposes, is the antagonist of this game. And Brad has no idea why he's antagonizing him. You go into an empty warehouse. This is kind of spooky the first time it happens. Empty warehouse, lights flicker off, lights flicker on. A bunch of guys wearing happy face masks appear. Like, whoa, what's going on here? Off and on again. Some guy with a big smile, black war paint, and spiked shoulder pads and a hat shows up, introduces himself as Buzzo, and I think he basically just gives you some joy.
Yep.
He doesn't force you to take it at the time. He just gives you some joy. And then they're gone. That is the least aggressive experience you have with Buzzo for the rest of the game. Because though there are other examples for one example, when you're going into a town where you've gotten a lead, someone might have information on Buddy. A couple raiders stop you and say, hey, we're going to go destroy this town. But if you pay us 100 mags, we won't destroy it. And you can choose to pay them, not pay them and fight them, or say, I don't care, go do it. If you pay them, that's it. That's all that happens. If you fight them, you can defeat them, but I don't think they're an easy fight.
Nope.
And if you say whatever, they will straight up murder the entire town. You lose a recruitable character, you lose shops. A bunch of people died because you wouldn't shell out the few. It's not a few, but at the same time, I don't remember using magazines for a ton. You find a lot of what you need. I could be wrong on that. This is where your actions do have consequence, because now this next area is going to be way harder because you let these people go in because you wanted your magazines for what? And in a similar area where you think it's in a similar location, I don't remember. I know it's optional, but there is a part where you go to this big chateau. We talked about this right before we recorded. And there's an obese guy sitting on the roof being fanned by two of his manservants. And you're like, okay, cool, I guess. And he says something like, use any of the facilities. Everybody here's happy to help. Interesting. You go inside. All the furniture is people. Like, it's a weird BDSM thing going on here. And then you go into the bathroom, and there is literally a human toilet bowl. I can still see his little pixelated mouth open. And you get an achievement that says, oh God, no. If while you're looking through his house, you find a stack of porno mags, not a small stack either. It's like 150 or 200 or something. Like, oh, I'll just take these. But in this game, every action you do seems to have a repercussion.
And I will say that for those porno magazines, they are useful for buying healing items that you can use in combat. Mm-hmm. And they're also an important trading tool to get some of the more powerful characters to join your party. So they are not inconsequential, but by the end of the game, you're certainly not dealing with scarcity like them. Mm-hmm. But I think that's most RPGs and currency.
I would agree with that. When you leave this gentleman's house, he goes, did you take my magazines? That will not stand. We will fight. ... if it wasn't such a nice day. And that's it. There's no consequence in this. So the game is constantly subverting its own expectations, which really, I don't know. I really like that idea that it never really lets you know where it was going with this stuff. For example, I think I'll let you take the reins on the Orphans. I don't remember the context of where you encounter them, but it's one of the funniest in-game moments.
This is actually pretty early on in the game. So the game is kind of divided into 3 distinct areas and then a final area. And I think Josh and I were talking about, in general, then in each area you kind of move around as you desire, but near the end, then you kind of are ushered into the next area. Mm-hmm. So pretty early on in this first area, you come across an orphanage. There's this man who's taking care of a bunch of little children, and he asks you to get him. He says he's so thirsty. He wants you to get him some water. There's some in a bucket right over here. Mm-hmm. And the bucket of water is right, that you can pick up is right next to him. Well, you go ahead and you pick it up and you hand it to him. It spills and goes all over the orphans. Mm-hmm. And then the orphans catch fire because, once again, wacky coincidence. And all these orphans are dead. And he's very pissed off at you. He's going, what the man? Why did you grab that bucket of gasoline? I wanted the bucket of water. And the camera pans and shows you that far off away, it was a bucket of water that he wanted you to grab. Now, you can't actually grab this for him. If you try and start walking down that path to go past the orphans to get the bucket of water, he'll be blocked by a text wall where every time he just says, come on, man, I just want a drop of water. Just give me some water. So it forces you to go ahead and burn the orphans. But that's one of those inevitable, just kind of funny but tragic kind of moments that are in the game.
So another thing that adds to it, because after they're on fire, it's like, oh my God, quick, go get the water you were supposed to get. You go up there real fast and it takes him out of frame. And when you come back, there's just a pile of ashes. He's like, well, and it's really dark. There's a bunch of torched orphans, but it's also really funny.
Another scene like that in the game, and this is something that I enjoyed a lot, was you come across this mountain area where you have these people that worship Wally, and what it is that there's this intercom where you go ahead and you pray to Wally into the intercom, and a bag of fast food goes ahead and drops down. It comes down almost divinely, right? And it's comical and it's silly and goofy. They're praying to a literal fast food chain. And you go ahead and you get up there. I think you can fight this guy called Little Nuggy on the way up there, where it's like a guy in a chicken nugget suit that's a decently tough fight. I'd call it at least mini-boss caliber.
It doesn't... No, it's Wally. Okay, so you're fighting Nuggy.
Yeah, and then when you get up to the top, you find Wally, and it's this guy who literally seems to be grafted into this mascot uniform, who is working this abandoned fast food thing where there's just these piles of meat that you have no idea where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. And as you fight this guy, when you fight this guy, he tells you, please, no, I just want to die. I just want to die. This guy is begging you for death. Something is forcing him to go ahead and feed these people whatever he's feeding them. And as you crack the little, circular, almost Jack-in-the-Box style mascot head, you see almost like those little pieces of flesh. Like, you almost get a sense like this guy's got this cancer tumor, and he's cutting parts of it out and feeding them to people. And to me, this, along with that Salvation Rangers thing, that really is kind of that key part of the game to me. Is it's like this comedic horror thing where it's kind of starting off fun, goofy, and playful, but it's almost like this nightmare that shifts to just disgusting and unsettling in the process.
Well, and I remember as you're going through the cult that's worshipping Wally, are they the ones who are complete pacifists? I can't remember.
No, that's actually in Lisa the Joyful, the sequel / downloadable content.
Oh, right.
Pack.
Well, and we will get to that. But I remember after you defeat Wally, if you go back down, they've all left because their prayers aren't being answered anymore. So again, a weird dark juxtaposition where you essentially condemned all these people to death because you thought that Buddy would just be past Wally somewhere.
Actually, I think at that point in the game, then you're trying to go ahead and get equipment. So there's some sort of item that you're getting to assemble a boat. I could be mistaken if this is an area. If this is an area 2, I'm wrong. If this is an area 3, though, then you have kind of a little fetch quest area where each one of these doors has an item you need to construct a boat to go sail to Rando Island.
You're right, because at the end... Is it the end of Act 1 or somewhere in Act 2 they introduced Rando?
It's the end of Act 1. At the end of Act 1, then you go ahead and you're on this bicycle and you basically ride your bicycle right into Rando. And
doesn't even faze him.
Nope. He hands you some rations, and then there's reference to tears in his eyes. You think you see tears in his eyes when he walks away. And is this a good time to kind of talk about Rando's backstory? Because at the time, I thought this was real interesting, because I thought it was just, getting ran into with a bike that hard is going to make someone kind of tear up a little bit. That's all it is. He's holding in the tears.
Rando was a super interesting character, so we'll go ahead and get on. One thing that's important to note here is that this world, called Olaf, we may not mention it again, is more or less governed by different warlords. And Rando is the king of kings when it comes to these warlords. So why don't you go ahead and get into his backstory from here?
Sure. So, you mentioned about how it was a little bit odd that you had Brad going ahead and doing those kind of button combos to go ahead and do the Sabin style martial arts. And the reason for that is that back before this White Flash that got rid of all the women, Brad was actually a martial arts instructor, and there was a kid in his dojo called Dustin. Dustin gets mutilated at some point by...
it's Buzzo.
Yes, that was by Buzzo. He basically shreds off half of Dustin's face.
Oh, he straight up cuts his face off with a buzzsaw, because you find out later that... and we'll get into this more later, but Buzzo, when he was still not Buzzo, he was actually childhood friends with Brad's little sister, Lisa, who you never hear referred to you very rarely hear referred to by name during this game. So, in retribution for letting Brad's father molest, that's Lisa, Buzzo cut off Dustin's face with a buzzsaw. But go ahead.
And with that, that's part of why he's wearing the mask, and that's actually the real reason for the tears, is because he can tell that this is his reunion with Brad, basically, and Brad doesn't really recognize him, not really sure what to say. Dustin, to me, is one of those kind of sad, tragic, sympathetic characters that's in this game, where someone who's really weak and kind became extremely powerful and is still very kind, and unfortunately, through the events of these games, is not able to stop the disaster that befalls people in this tragedy.
Brad and later Buddy just take advantage of him.
Yep.
This was the only guy I legit felt bad for the whole game. I felt bad for Buddy later for a different reason, but Rando, as we have mentioned previously, Red Skull Rando, because his mask is a red skull.
Yep.
He is the only thing that keeps this world from turning into total anarchy. Because even though a bunch of warlords run different parts of the world, they all look up to him. So even though he can beat all of them mercilessly, you never really come into a huge amount of conflict with Rando's army until the very, very end.
So we talked a little bit about Buzzo just there and kind of the backstory about Lisa. Is this a good time to kind of talk a little bit about Lisa the First and kind of why this was a Kickstarter game in the first place?
So let's go ahead and just wrap up, because I feel like, no, let's talk about Lisa the First, and then we'll talk about the ending of Lisa the Painful when we transition to the DLC. Okay, so Lisa the First actually did precede Lisa the Painful, but it was a free-to-play shareware game. It's like, 30 minutes long max?
It's a style of games that I think a lot of people refer to as a Yume Nikki, which is a reference to a Japanese horror game. And there's a lot of these kind of freeware horror games out there that are similar to Yume Nikki, where it's basically just you're exploring around these random environments. The gameplay elements can be somewhat minimal. It's almost kind of just like a wandering puzzle game.
Yep.
In Lisa the First, I think the only real gameplay you have is dodging these Marty spiders that exist that kind of are present in your hallucinations, and you're trying, and if you run into them, then you have to go ahead and start wandering through this maze area again. But these games are really more to unsettle you through their atmosphere and their writing, more so than really have a gameplay system.
And why I recommended, because Nick, would you have played this game had I not recommended it?
Lisa, I think I would have, just because of
Lisa the First.
I would not.
So the Lisa the First I recommended just because it really helps contextualize Brad, because as in Lisa the First, you don't play as Brad, you play as Lisa. And the whole game is more or less 90% is a representation of the abuse she's receiving from her father, Marty. I know there's one puzzle where you have to insert a sword into the bottom part of a statue, which, and it's not subtle in its imagery. And when you get to the end of it, it's just, you don't escape. It just shows that bad things are going to keep happening to Lisa. And in the quote-unquote good ending, do you remember, did you get both endings?
I don't recall.
So you keep collecting items, and you need to collect all the items in order to, much like Yume Nikki, which the sound I made earlier was not discussed with the game. It's just an unsettling game, much like Lisa the First, because it's a lot of real graphic, sometimes sexual imagery that's meant to unnerve you. I know to get to the last area, you are going through what looks like a big, posh, nice area. And then at the end, there's a big blob of Marty. It's a big blob, and it's got his head on it, and you actually have to go into it to get through. It's really, really unsettling, and it gives some more backstory about why she used to like Marty, because he used to be really nice to her. There's flashbacks of him having like a tea party with her. And then as she got older, things got darker.
If I recall correctly, then Marty's wife died, and at that point he became a violent alcoholic who beat Brad and sexually abused Lisa.
Correct. And to bring the darkness full circle, there is a second ending you can get where if you follow certain steps, you can get a videotape. And the videotape is strongly implied to be a message from Lisa's mom, with the idea being that you'll have some words of encouragement with which to continue on and make it through this. When you put the VHS in the player, it shows Lisa go up to a woman from behind, and she goes, Lisa, I'll never forget you. But she turns around and she has Marty's face, implying that she does not even remember what her mom looks like from all the abuse she suffered from this guy, which is awful. So this is important because Brad is not present in Lisa the First. Lisa the First could have happened in the span of 60 minutes on any given day from her part. Buzzo is not apparent in Lisa the First either. But through the entirety of Lisa the Painful, Brad is haunted by these specters of his sister, because he either was too weak to do anything to save her, he didn't do anything to save her. Occasionally you'll just go into an area and this little girl will be watching you from a plateau. I know the opening splash for Lisa the Painful shows that little girl hanging herself. It's dark near the end of the game where Brad is really struggling with the fact that he might have condemned Buddy to the same abuse that Lisa, except a million times worse because everybody in this planet wants a piece of her. So as it's getting worse, he sees more and they keep getting more aggressive and they keep mentally assaulting him. And it's really tearing him up. And it's obviously really tearing up Buzzo too, because I believe in some expanded media, you can see that Lisa was heavily damaged from her abuse. Lisa asks Buzzo at one point to cut off a cat's paws with his buzzsaw, which he agrees to because he's got a childhood crush on Lisa. And then Lisa asks him to cut her so maybe Marty won't assault her anymore.
Rape her.
Yeah.
Let's call it what it is.
It is. So, yeah. And so as we get to near the end, we're going to transition back now because this was an important backstory for the ending of Lisa the Painful. Because Brad does catch up with Buddy. Do you remember where he sees Buddy for the first time again? Well, I don't think it's the first time, I'm sorry. But he finds Buddy in the care of Marty, who is still alive. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you had some you wanted to talk about this, because this is an interesting bit. You kind of lose the idea of control at this point, because I tried it both ways. I was trying to be a quote-unquote nice guy through most of the game. At the beginning, there's two choices Buzzo really gives you. At the end of Act 1 is the first one. And he says, give me all your inventory, at which point you have a legit inventory, or give me your arm. This is important because if you lose an arm, you lose the ability to do some of Brad's moves. You cripple Brad if you don't have it. And at the end of the second chapter part, he says, give me your other arm, or I'm killing everybody in your party. And he will. And if you deny him in either case, he will do both of the things. He will take your arm and kill them or take your whole inventory.
Yep.
So this isn't a thing you can get out of, because if you try to fight him, he'll wreck you.
And this is a whole, and what we talked about with Lisa the First in that backstory, that's the whole reason why Buzzo has this whole hate on for you the whole game. And you kind of piece that together, as you said, by the very end. At first, you're just confused about why is this person trying to torture me. You find out about what he did to Dustin. Mm-hmm. Later on, I think you don't find out Dustin is Rando until the very end of the game, correct?
You don't find out then, and the only way it is ever explicitly said is if you beat the game on hard mode, you get a flashback where Brad goes back to the dojo, and he finds Dustin with his face cut off, and even though Brad is more or less Dustin's adoptive father, Dustin still apologizes to him. So, it's dark.
Yep.
Anyways, so we were talking
about Marty. I was curious. I know you mentioned they kind of lose the illusion of choice at this point. So you have the choice to go ahead and spare or fight or kill. And if you do try to go ahead and choose to spare, you don't actually get to spare. Brad basically lapses into this joy-fueled fever and goes ahead and destroys Marty in a very graphic fashion. There's literally just chunks of blood and flesh sitting on this couch where his father used to be, because Marty's saying, I've changed, I'm so sorry for the past. But all Brad can think of watching this is all the times that Lisa was raped, and here Buddy has been in the care of Marty.
And Buddy, you find out at this point, has actually despised has despised Brad for years because he never let her see the world at all. And apparently, according to her, Marty had turned a new leaf because, according to her, Marty took very good care of her. And despite the fact she was kidnapped, nobody ever did anything to her the entire time they were traveling.
That does touch on one of the other horrible choices that you have with regards to Buzzo, actually, is that he asks you to go ahead and either have Buddy lose one of her nipples, or is it one or three of your party members that die?
I think it would be...
I think this is the one where it's all three.
I thought in that case it was just one.
You might be right. I think there's another one where it's if you have to lose your second or either another arm or your first arm, or kill all 3 of your party members. There's 4 key ultimatums that Buzzo gives you along your quest.
Yeah, I forgot about the nipple or party member, because this again is a lose-lose scenario, because I actually changed my party so she wouldn't have to be mutilated. And later, she gives you a heart. You let somebody die, so I didn't have to lose a small part of me. What is wrong with you? He's like, well, I was just trying to take care of you. And is this the part after she gets away from Marty because she hates you? So she gets away from Brad because she hates him. Is that when her face gets carved up?
I think so. I think she runs off during that fight, either whether you choose to or whether the joy-fueled murder haze comes over you. You come to, Marty is blobs of flesh, and Buddy is gone. That's my memory of it. And then at that point, if you go ahead and you go out, you see that Buzzo has gotten a hold of her and has treated her the same way that he treated Dustin.
Well, there was somebody with claws, and I don't remember who it was, because Buzzo, while he does mutilate her that one time, some guy gets a hold of her and is trying to, pet her face, but he's actually...
Do we want to pause and just look this up and then go from there? So we looked it up, and actually we were mistaken before. It isn't Buzzo that's doing the cutting in this instance. When you get to the end, you find this character, Mr. Anginelli. So Mr. Anginelli is the father of one of Brad's childhood friends, Sticky. Sticky is one of these 4 guys who at the very beginning of the game is encouraging you to go ahead and turn over Buddy to Rando, and how, if we turn her over, we'll be set for life, we'll have all these stuff. We'll have all the magazines, all the food we could ever want, and life will be just fine. And it turns out that Sticky's father is actually this mutant with these claws that he has attached to him, and he's gotten Buddy and is kind of stroking her face with those claws, mutilating her. Sticky as well. So you do end up going against your friends as part of this quest, and Sticky is one of those people that prior to this point you've already fought and killed, and you do actually even have nightmares about Sticky, where there's this giant, goofy, almost comical Sticky head that I think is kind of supposed to represent Brad's guilt about the fact that he's kind of gone against his friends, but also that sense that he can't trust them and that they're the true threat to Buddy and everyone else.
I also got a real phallic thing off of it, because Sticky made a strong implication he had interest in Buddy beyond platonic.
Oh.
So I got that he was terrified that Sticky had done something to Buddy. So he was this enormous phallic tower. And but anyways, we're getting near the end of the game now. And at this point, once you defeat the clawed Mr. Anginelli, Buddy says she hates Brad for everything he's done and she runs off, and Brad's class changes from fighter to loser. He's so down on himself at this point. And as you still try to go after Buddy, this is when you start fighting Rando's army, kind of. Because I think Buzzo forces you to take a bunch of joy at this point.
Yep.
And Brad just goes crazy. He kills all of Rando's army. Your party members show up to try to stop you.
So I was curious about how you interpreted that scene with those party members. Did you interpret it as these people have interest in Buddy and I can't trust him, or did you interpret it as, hey, she's safe, it's okay, it's going to be okay, man?
It depended on the characters, because I know there was one character, a wrestler masked guy, who explicitly said, I'm going to get me a piece of Buddy.
Oh.
Whereas there was the drunk guy, Birdie, who he just felt guilt. He wanted Brad to understand he knew where he was coming from, because he lost his whole family and he felt awful about it. But Brad was so set on protecting her from anybody that he killed everybody.
All your friends you've made along the way.
All your friends. You kill Rando's army. You fight Rando and defeat him. And the game ends. Because as he's killing these people, the background keeps flashing to these gory scenes, and things just keep flashing in and out of what could be real and what's not. When the dust has settled, you are riddled with arrows, and you're going to try to find Buddy. And you collapse right in front of Buddy, and Buddy just kind of walks away. But then, since you had a bunch of joy stuffed down your throat, you become a mutant, regardless of how much you've taken during the game or not. And the game ends on an unbelievably downer note in that regard, because it just has mutant Brad inching his way toward Buddy. And that's how you think it ends. And just as a small side note before we transition on to the DLC/sequel, Lisa the Joyful, which will be pretty snappy, all things considered, there is usually the background sound for a lot of the hub areas is a trumpet, and you can see a guy up on a plateau playing the trumpet, and then in the last area, after you defeat Rando and you're covered in arrows, if you go all the way to the left, you can find Trumpet Guy just standing there watching you. So he has some importance you're not familiar with.
I will just say, I think that was a really great closer to the game, because going back to how I thought one of the themes for the game was about that kind of funny, haha, comedic thing slowly shifting into something nightmarish and horrific, I feel like they nailed making this a tragedy, where you can kind of see someone's good intentions and the inevitability of the path that they're going down and their inability to course correct and how much they destroy everything. Mm-hmm. Rando's army was the best chance of peace, order, and provision for people in this valley, and Brad, with his quest to go ahead and save Buddy, destroyed all of that. This place is just a hellish landscape now.
Yeah. It's pretty dark. And then the sequel DLC, we're good to transfer to Lisa the Joyful?
Yep.
So this is a much shorter story, but you play as Buddy in this Lisa the Joyful DLC. It starts with Brad coming at her. Buzzo, I guess, watching Brad destroy everything, realized he had been projecting unfairly onto Brad. He said, I shouldn't have done all this to him. I now see how bad he suffered on his own. So he helps Buddy get out of there. And Rando, who apparently hasn't died, joins up to help her because she feels like she's been powerless her whole life, and she knows she's stronger than that. So what she wants to do is be the new warlord of the world. And Rando goes, well, here's all the other warlords you gotta take down if you want to do that. And he helps her for the first... There's East and West World, I think. Olaf is, again, what it's called. He'll help her with the entire first list, but watching how ruthlessly she's killing people. And you can't really blame her. Because in this game, if you take off your equipment of mask, every NPC will attack her because she's a female and they're all males. Even shopkeepers will attack you if they see you without it. So you kind of get the feeling you know why she's doing it, but she's absolutely ruthless in her pursuit of it. So halfway through the game, when you go to sleep, Rando disappears in the night. And there's the strong implication that he can't really sanction what she's doing because this goes against what he's been trying to do since the world went to hell. And so you have to defeat the rest of the warlords on your own, which it's a weird change because in the first game you had so many characters to choose from. In this game you don't really have any. And you do find fun little throwbacks to the main game. Like at one point you can find the Green Salvation Ranger. He is the only NPC in the game who will not assault Buddy if he sees her without her mask on. He just says, I really miss my friends. Aww. And you do get little insights into some of the other characters, like you can go and find, I don't remember if it's a hallucination or what, but you can kind of find a representation of Lisa's funeral at one point. You can find her coffin, and that's when you get some insight into Buzzo's history with her. And it fills out some of the story more than I was anticipating it would, including but not limited to, when you've defeated all the warlords, the trumpet guy shows back up, and it turns out he'd been using his trumpet to control all the mutants. His name was Dr. Yato, and he facilitated the fall of mankind, basically, and Dr. Yato is strongly implied to be Buddy's father.
Yep.
And you find Rando hanging from barbed wire, and Yato's like, all right, my mutant's going to eat him. Like, this is where it ends.
You also have, going back to Dr. Yato being heavily implied to be Buddy's father, you also, I think this is actually back in Lisa the Painful.
Yes.
You do find a Joy Factory where you find something that heavily implies that this is the corpse of Buddy's mother, mm-hmm. and that Buddy's mother was basically experimented on by Dr. Yato.
And I could be wrong, but I think I can't remember if it's in the Painful or the Joyful, there's an alternate ending you can get where Yato actually talks to her and says, understand that this is nothing personal. This is just how it has to be now. And he kills Buddy's mom after she gives birth to Buddy.
Yep.
And the Joyful has two ways of ending. So Dr. Yato dies. I can't remember if I think his mutant killed him, but I can't remember. And Buzzo holds off his mutant. But in the process, Buzzo starts mutating, and you go through a big whole Buddy coming to grips with her past and her feelings, because she has to defeat a mental manifestation of Brad. She has to fight the mutated Buzzo, who has tried to take care of her ever since he realized the error of his ways. She goes through, it's a huge phased boss. Oh, I remember now. You have to fight Brad as you have memories of him. Like, this made me legit sad, because she realizes she's only remembering the Brad she hated. She starts remembering the Brad that took care of her when she was little, and the Brad that made her feel better whenever she felt bad. And then how much he was just trying to help at the end, and how her anger was still sort of justified, but his perspective on it. And this is why I recommended you play the first, because it really helps round out your perspective of why Brad was so protective, even if it was misaligned. So she goes through all this, and the very last decision you can make in the game is whether or not she's going to take, because at the beginning of the game she was given joy. There's no option whether or not you can still take joy, but it doesn't affect the ending. The only thing that affects the ending is whether or not you take the antidote to joy to keep her from transforming.
Because it's like the antidote will make her sterile, correct?
No.
No? Okay.
I only know that for a fact because in the ending where she takes the antidote, you see her with the Brad mutant, and she has buried Buzzo, and she has a child. Okay. It's many years in the future.
What's supposed to be the trade-off then why she wouldn't take the antidote? I thought there was some dilemma to that choice.
I think the dilemma was whether or not she was doing what other people wanted her to do.
Okay.
So in the ending where she does take the antidote, she realizes she's the only hope for things to get better. And you see her with the trumpet, so you know she is now controlling mutants, so she doesn't have to worry about them. Buzzo, it's the most optimistic outcome. If she doesn't take the antidote, she turns into an absolutely monstrous mutant, and you see she annihilates, I think it's the Brad mutant, and yeah, it's a downer ending. But this series really called out to me for so many reasons. I really love the nihilism behind it. I really like the contrasting between goofy and incredibly dark. In fact, there's a couple fan games we're not going to touch on because we're essentially out of time. But there's one called There's one called The Hopeful, where it's a bunch of people going to try and find a different girl they'd heard about, but it's because the main character just wants another friend. And there's another one called The Pointless, where there's a guy living on Trash Island, which is an optional area we didn't talk about, who's convinced there's got to be something better, but he struggles the whole game wondering why they're even worrying about something better, because the whole world's crap. So I really would have loved to touch on these games, but I knew we'd be able to fill this up with just the main stuff. We didn't even touch on how varied some of the characters are, how wacky some of them are.
Most of this has been a discussion about the depressing main story, but I really think it's worth checking out also just for the humor. Like, if you can handle this level of darkness, then this is definitely a game that's worth playing for its funny stuff. And I'd like to mention the second warlord in Lisa the Joyful, who you're supposed to fight. You come upon him and you're supposed to fight him, and at the end of his little area, you find that he's hung up, strung up, covered in blood hanging from a noose, and has arrows all over him. You fight the guys that went ahead and did that to him, and then you go ahead to turn and try and walk away. And he interrupts you and stops you and goes, "Hey, where do you think you're going? I didn't get on this list by being a goddamn." And then a fight starts off.
That actually made me laugh when it happened. That was super funny. I know that there's I don't remember if it's a hidden area or a side area where it's a shrine area made by Terry Hintz to himself, and at the end you can get a mask of him to wear.
That's in Lisa the Joyful.
Mm-hmm.
And one other point I wanted to call out is you have a sign that tells you there's a meaning of life and you have to climb up this super tall ladder. It takes a good minute and a half to climb up. You're climbing up several screens and you get up there and it's just a gigantic middle finger.
And if you try to jump off the edge like you can in everything else, it just goes, nah.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. It takes, without exaggeration, at least 3 minutes of just climbing, if not more. Which, again, is an homage to something from Lisa the First, where they did the exact same thing. And the last funny note that I want to touch on, they patched in easy mode at one point, which I thought was weird because there wasn't an easy mode qualifier at the beginning setting you could change. And it turns out in the first or second area, there's a little cave you can go into. And it goes this way for easy mode. And easy mode is just you fighting 2 dummies. I don't remember I think the first one was some kind of Buzzo. I don't remember, but the second one was Marty. And when you defeat it, the person running it goes, yeah, okay, whatever. And it just, the end. So I thought that was really funny because basically like the meaning of life, like it's the same idea. If you can't handle this, whatever, get out. We don't care. These games are incredibly cheap. I know Lisa the Painful came out. We played that 2 years ago at this point, and it had already been out for months when we played it.
It's on Steam for $10 standard, I think.
Yeah, it's super cheap, and the DLC is cheap as well. Lisa the First, which I wouldn't recommend going into blind because it's so bizarre if you don't have any context. That's free. There's fan games that are free. I would really recommend you checking this out just because I think it is a experience you're going to be hard-pressed to replicate. Anyways, you got any final thoughts?
This has been a real happy episode of Co-Opinions to be on you, Josh. How about we go ahead and do one next about teen suicide?
Well, we kind of touched on that in this one. I promise.
Good being here, Josh.
I promise next time we have an episode, it'll be something more upbeat because I think this is the second episode in a row where we've talked about stuff that makes us want to lay down in traffic.
Yep.
Yeah. But that aside, thanks a lot for coming on, Nick.
The highway's calling me.
Heyo. Get online. Tell us if this sounds like something you would like to check out. If you have played it, we would love to know your thoughts. But until next time, my name is Josh, and this is Co-Opinions.
Bye, Josh.